we are still busy looking at milk as one of the primary food commodities. Now, we have already mentioned the different sources of microorganisms that can contaminate milk, and this included the microorganisms that can be present in the interior of the udder, especially those ones that are associated with mastitis. We have looked at the microorganisms that will come from the immediate environment in which the cows are kept, as well as those microorganisms that are coming from the milking equipment. So what we have seen is that for each and every one of these sources, there are simple methods that can be applied in order to ensure that there is low contamination of the milk. And most of these methods are very simple. However, not all farmers apply these methods, even though they are known to them. In order to encourage the farmers to apply these good practices, the Milk Marketing Board in England and Wales introduced penalties, whereby they said to the farmers they will buy the milk and the price per liter will depend on the total bacterial count of the raw milk that they are supplying. So as soon as the farmers knew that there will be penalties applied, even before the payment scheme itself was implemented, a reduction in total bacterial counts in their raw milk was noted. For implementation of the scheme, which still continued despite the reduction in total bacterial counts before the actual use of the payment scheme, the milk was graded into different classes depending on the total bacterial counts. So the different classes of the milk were A, B, C1, C2, C3, and these classes were depending on the actual count of the bacteria that is present in the milk, and it was also depending on whether the milk from that supply has been previously implicated to have high counts of this total bacterial count. Now, the good thing about the scheme was that the milk that had very low bacterial counts, the Milk Marketing Board paid more in terms of the price per liter. So there was an incentive for farmers who ensured that they have low bacterial counts in their raw milk. And at the same time, the C3 class is where there were penalties whereby the price was reduced if high bacterial counts were recorded for the milk supplied by a certain farmer. So for the pricings of the different classes of milk, you are advised to check table 5.3 in your textbook. It is common practice that milk is kept cold after milking. So this practice allows growth of psychotrophic bacteria within the milk. So storage of milk at low temperatures and its resultant dominance by these psychotrophs makes the use of traditional methods for checking the microbiological quality of the milk, so traditional methods such as the dye reduction tests, obsolete. This is because the test depends on the metabolic activity of microorganisms present in the milk. So the principle is that when metabolically active microorganisms are present, they will result in the reduction of the dye and they will lead to a color change. So psychotrophs that will be dominant in the milk are slow growers and they will be present in relatively low numbers. So if you subject the milk that contains high numbers of the psychotroph, to example the methylene reduction test, which is one methylene blue reduction test, which is one of the dye reduction tests. For the test, the milk will be incubated for 8 hours and then the results will be checked whether the milk is still blue or the milk is colorless. So when the psychrotrophs are available or are the ones that are dominant, they will grow very slowly. And also, since originally they are present in very low numbers, the consequence of that is that by the end of the test, the results that one obtains may not be a true reflection of the numbers of psychotrophic organisms that are there. For example, if the psychotrophs are present and are present in low numbers, such that they do not result in reduction of methylene blue, for example, by the end of the 8 hours, the milk will still remain blue. And in terms of what the test is supposed to indicate then, that will say to you there are no microorganisms that can potentially spoil the milk. So that gives you a false negative in terms of the presence of potential spoilage microorganisms in the milk. So what we have discussed so far indicates that raw milk will contain microorganisms. And therefore, in order to extend its shelf life, we need to apply some kind of control strategies to minimize growth of these microorganisms and thereby increase or extend the shelf life of the milk. The commonly used method for extending the shelf life of milk is heat treatment. Let's now discuss the heat treatment processes that are used to extend the shelf life of milk. Milk is an important agent of disease, so it can contain those microorganisms that cause some serious diseases such as the Mycobacterium species, the Brucella. In addition to that, the common human pathogens such as Salmonella and Campylobacter are present in raw milk. So the aim of these heat treatment processes is to ensure safety of the milk. So it should reduce the spoilage organisms, and at the same time they have to be able to reduce the microorganisms that cause disease, so the pathogens. Milk can be subjected to 4 types of heat treatment processes indicated in the table: the low temperature holding, high temperature short time, commonly referred to as pasteurization, ultra high temperature, and we are very familiar with UHT milk. And there's also what is called sterilized milk, which is not common. For example, in South Africa, this has been a product that was produced some time ago in the UK. So depending on the heat treatment process to which the milk is subjected, it will have a different shelf life. So for example, if you look at LTH holding, we see that the temperature that is applied is relatively lower, but the treatment time is longer. Pasteurization, for example, is around 72 degrees Celsius, which will result in the shelf life of 5 to 10 days. UHT process uses 135 degrees Celsius for a second. And all this treatment process, as I've already indicated, will result in different shelf lives of the milk. For pasteurization, if we start looking at the different processes, for pasteurization, the microbiological quality of pasteurized milk after treatment is based on the European Union regulation, and this specifies that pasteurized milk must have no coliforms, so it must have less than 1 colony forming unit per ml, and a count of less than 3 times 10 to exponent 4 colony forming units at 30 degrees Celsius. And if pasteurized milk is stored for 5 days at 6 degrees Celsius, its count at 21 degrees Celsius must be less than 10 to exponent 5 colony forming units per ml. So it is not just about exposing it to 72 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds. It has to ensure that after treatment, it complies with those specifications. How do we now check the efficiency of a pasteurization process? Obviously, it doesn't make sense that you'll have to wait to do the microbiological counts or viability counts, because that is going to take very long. What is done after milk is pasteurized, then the test that is used to test or to check the efficiency of the pasteurization process, which is going to yield results within a short period of time compared to viability counts, is called the phosphatase test. The principle of the test is that the milk will contain the enzyme alkaline phosphatase. Now, this enzyme is sensitive to the temperature and time that are used in pasteurization. So when present in milk and the milk is efficiently pasteurized, that process will lead to inactivation of alkaline phosphatase. So what happens during the test is, subsequent to exposure of the milk to the treatment process, the treated milk will then be taken, and what happens in the test is that you take a sample of the milk and you add a chromogenic substrate to the treated milk. So based on the presence of that chromogenic substrate, its hydrolysis by active phosphatase will result in a color change. So it will produce a certain color. So if after addition of the chromogenic substrate, there is production of color which is based on active phosphatase. So active phosphatase will hydrolyze that substrate and will produce a color. So ideally, if the pasteurization process was effective, you will expect that the enzyme will be inactivated and therefore it will not be able to hydrolyze the substrate. Or if some of it was inactivated but you still have those enzymes that are active, the intensity of the color that is going to be produced will be different to the control milk, which was not exposed to heat treatment. So after treating the milk and adding the chromogenic substance, the color that is produced will then be compared to standards. And based on the differences between the standards and the color of the treated milk, you can be able to tell whether the pasteurization process was effective or not. Obviously, you want the milk to be indicating that the alkaline phosphatase was inactivated. Then you will know that minimal hydrolysis of the chromogenic substrate is due to the heat process having inactivated the enzyme, and therefore you are sure that the pasteurization process has done what it was intended to. So it has led to reduction of the microorganisms that were present in the raw milk. The next type of heat treatment is what is called UHT. So this is for production of what we commonly refer to as long life milk. So for this, the milk is exposed to temperatures as high as 135 degrees Celsius for 1 second. So the main concern regarding the UHT process has been the fact that the heat process that is applied is less intense or lower than the botulinum cook, which is recommended for low acid foods. So those food products that has a pH above 4.5, we know that milk has a moderate pH. So the main concern regarding that was that the UHT process itself will not be able to require, or will not be able to get the botulinum cook the botulinum could being that temperature that will result in the 12-day reduction in the numbers of surviving Clostridium botulinum spores within a food sample. So for the botulinum cook, the temperature that is used is 121 degrees Celsius for 3 minutes. However, despite the fact that the botulinum cook is higher than the parameters that are used for UHT processing, but the milk has never been associated with botulism. So there are no records of cases of the presence of Clostridium botulinum in the milk that has been subjected to UHT processing. So the main reasons for that is the fact that the incidences for presence of Clostridium botulinum in the milk is already very low, and also the manufacturers always apply the heat process that is more intense than the specified minimum legal requirement. So they would, for safety purposes, just to be on the safe side, when they do UHT process in practice, what has been observed is that they do expose the milk to the temperatures that are above 135 degrees Celsius. Hence, UHT processed milk is still safe and does not lead to cases of botulism, despite the fact that the temperature used or specified is below what is regarded as the botulinum cook. The next type of milk is sterilized milk. So this is the milk which is processed in the bottle and it's exposed to temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius for 30 to 40 minutes. Now that exposure time is sufficient for the milk to pass the turbidity test. What is this turbidity test and what is its principle? So the principle of the turbidity test is that the heat process that is applied is high enough to denature whey proteins. So in the test, ammonium sulfate is added to the heat-treated milk to precipitate casein. So what happens, or what is expected to happen, is that the heat treatment process will denature casein as well as the whey proteins, and therefore they will be precipitated by addition of ammonium sulfate. So after addition of ammonium sulfate, there will be precipitation of both the whey proteins and casein, and the milk will be filtered. So all the denatured proteins will be trapped by the filter, so the filtrate or the milk that passes through the filter then will be free of any proteins that are denatured. So the filtrate will subsequently be subjected to a second heat treatment. So if during the second exposure to the heat treatment process the milk remains clear, then it passes the turbidity test. This indicates that all the whey proteins were denatured by the first heat treatment process applied, and therefore they were removed through precipitation with casein. If during the second heat treatment process, however, the milk turns turbid, that will indicate that some of the whey proteins were undenatured. So the initial heat treatment process failed to denature all the proteins that were present, and that will indicate that the milk will not be acceptable because there is a chance that it did not completely sterilize the milk. So, despite the fact that milk can be heat treated to minimize microorganisms that are present, we have experienced that milk can become spoiled. So we know spoilage characteristics. We know that when milk is spoiled, it will have off odors, it will have off flavors referred to as fruity or putrid smells. There will also be visual defects such as clotting. So let's now look at those microorganisms that can cause spoilage of milk. Gram-negative psychotrophs, which we expect to be the dominant microorganisms due to keeping the milk at 7 degrees Celsius, as we have already discussed. These microorganisms will be killed by pasteurization. So if they are present and the milk, for example, is pasteurized, then they will be inactivated. However, the problem comes as a result of ability of some of the psychotrophic microorganisms, such as the pseudomonas, to produce heat stable lipases and proteases. So if these pseudomonas are present in the raw milk at high levels, so as high as above 10 to exponent 5 colony forming units per mil of the raw milk, those levels will be sufficient for those pseudomonas to produce high numbers of those heat-stable enzymes, so the lipases and proteases. So when the milk is subsequently pasteurized, the process will result in killing of the psychotrophs themselves, but the enzymes that they have produced already, they will remain active. And those are the microorganisms that are now going to spoil the milk that has been processed. So it will be something that you find that there's signs of rancidity as well as casein degradation, which indicates now that the microorganisms, specifically the psychotrophs that were initially present, produce those enzymes that survived the heat process or the pasteurization process, and they have resulted in subsequent spoilage of the milk. Gram-negative psychotrophs, which produce, or the enzymes produced by the gram-negative psychotrophs, are not the only ones that can cause spoilage of milk. There can also be presence of thermogenic microorganisms. Remember, we've mentioned them, especially when the milking equipment is not properly cleaned, which results in formation of milk stones, which protects or allow the growth of these thermogenic microorganisms, which are relatively heat resistant. So these thermogenic organisms, if present, they will survive the mild pasteurization process, and they will result in those of flavors and of odors. A typical example of a thermogenic bacillus is Bacillus cereus, which is responsible for formation of a defect known as BT cream. Now, Bacillus cereus will produce the enzyme lecithinase, and due to the presence of lecithinase activity, it will break down the phospholipases that are present in the fat globules, and they will produce proteinaceous fat particles. And these proteinaceous fat particles will float on top of hot drinks, and they can also adhere to the surfaces of the crockery and glasses. I think some of us have experienced that already, that you take that the milk, which is supposedly, or gave an impression, you had an impression that it was safe, as soon as you add it to the milk, it starts floating. So that is most of the time due to the presence of that lecithinase activity produced by Bacillus cereus. Commonly, milk is spoiled by gram-negative microorganisms that are produced after pasteurization. So if you take pasteurized milk, for example, and you plate out and you get growth of psychotrophic gram-negative organisms, then you would know that contamination occurred after pasteurization, because those microorganisms, we know they are sensitive to heat treatment process. So you should keep that in mind when you have to explain incidences in which the milk that is supposedly pasteurized shows the presence of psychotrophic gram-negative organisms. Then we have to remember that Since these organisms are naturally sensitive to the heat process, then the only way they can be present in pasteurized milk is if they have been introduced into the milk after it was pasteurized. So the heat treatment processes that we have mentioned will ensure that the milk has a shelf life of between 5 to 15 days. So if we were to produce the milk that has a shelf life longer than that, so to produce the milk that is regarded as ESL or extended shelf life milk, then the methods that are used have to be able to remove the spores from the milk. If you look at UHT process itself, it can be successful in removing the spores from the milk. However, the limitation with regards to use of UHT is the fact that it gives milk a cooked flavor, which is unappealing to most consumers. So in order to achieve or to produce this extended shelf life milk with acceptable taste of pasteurized milk, alternative strategies can be used. And the methods that have been explored include direct heating of the milk by steam injection to temperatures between 85 to 127 degrees Celsius for 2 seconds, or removal of spores by centrifugation combined with air pasteurization treatment, or thirdly, microfiltration of skim milk and its subsequent recombination with UHT treated cream. So all those three strategies, if they are used along with hygienic handling of the milk and the use of effective cold chain, can result in production with milk that has a shelf life of 21 days instead of the usual 5 to 15 days. So there are options or there are methods that can be used to get milk which has a longer shelf life and which does not have defects or which does not produce those characteristics such as the cooked flavor which are not required by the consumers. So if you have that cooked taste, then you will still have achieved longer shelf life, but in terms of the product acceptability, you will have a problem. But this is just to indicate that there are ways around that and it's possible to achieve both. We are going to end the discussion by looking at the milk products. So we know that fresh milk is used as a raw material or a starting point for production of other products such as your fermented milks, like your yogurt and your cheese, for production of dried milk, production of cream, and so forth. Now, each of these products will have properties that are different to that of the fresh milk from which they were produced, and hence the spoilage microflora of the different products will also be different from those of fresh milk. For that reason, the method that are used to extend the shelf life of these different products will be different. So we are going to look at the spoilage microflora of the different food products when we're doing a chapter on, for example, production of fermented food products. So we'll start to mention which organisms are going to cause spoilage of yogurt, which organisms will cause spoilage of cheese, and so forth. But the key message is that the microflora will be different, the spoilage characteristics also will be different. If we look at one example, once again, cream, the main concern or the main sign of spoilage will be lipolytic activity. So the breakdown of the fat will be what is the concern in terms of the shelf life of cream. Also, if, for example, one of these products, looking once again at cream, is pasteurized, then the pasteurization process that is applied the parameters used are higher than what is used for fresh milk. This is also as a result of the different characteristics between the milk and cream. Cream has got a lot of fats, and these fats will protect the microorganisms that are within the cream from the heat process, and therefore a higher heat treatment for a longer time is required to ensure that the microbes that are within the cream or the fat layer of the cream will be inactivated by the heat process. So, as we have said, the key message is that we should not assume that if a product is made from milk, then the spoilage microflora will be the same as the spoilage microflora of raw milk. And we also should not assume that the methods for extension of shelf life will be exactly the ones that are used for milk products. So this brings us to the end of our discussion of milk as a primary food commodity.